we're in our final week of our series called Be You. Hashtag Be You. My hope in this entire series was to inspire you and to challenge you a little bit in that God created you amazing. God created you for a plan and a purpose. God created you to have impact. Far too often, I think we step out of God's calling to conform to the things around us. This whole series was actually formed around an idea of two grunts that got together. I was in church one Sunday morning, and my buddy Scott Sloss walked up, and he made a crack about a screaming chicken, which is kind of an insult to the 101st. And then I come to find out that him and I served in the same unit, not at the same time. He was an officer, I was an NCO. Anyway, we were getting ready to go have coffee, and I do what I do a lot of times when I don't really know the person I'm going to go eat with. I Facebook stalked him. And so I jumped on, and I started reading some of his stuff, and he has this entire thread of hashtag Be You. I want to encourage you, jump on his Facebook, friend him, because it's every single morning he posts one of these, and it's an inspiration to me. But as we're sitting down having coffee, I said, man, that's just brilliant. Explain to me what's going on. And as he started talking, God put this thought and this hope in my heart. And we've created an entire series around it. And the whole premise of it is God knew you before you were even in your mother's womb. He created you. He created you with a plan and a purpose, not to just get through life, but to have amazing impact. We've talked about how often we change based on our surroundings. There's kind of the work us and the school us, and then there's the home us, and even the church us. And it's like a chameleon. We often change so that we can fit in to who we're around. We've talked about the mask that we wear oftentimes, that we hide behind, so to mask what's really going on, because we don't want people to know what's really going on in our hearts and our thoughts. We've talked about filling in the blank of I'm just and. We've talked about the things that we reach for who actually change us from who God created us to be. We've talked about how there will always be people in our life that when you step out in God's plan and purpose, that will come against you and try to knock you off of His plan and purpose for your life. This week I've titled our final message, Heads Up. Heads up. It's all about walking in confidence. You are who God created you to be, and you are exactly where He wants you to be for a time such as this. Philippians 4:6 says it this way: don't worry about anything. Instead, pray about everything, telling God what you need, and thank Him for all that He has done. We live in a world where there is so much pressure to perform. We live in a culture where everything that you do needs to be posted on Instagram or Facebook, or it needs to be snapped. It's like, I need people to see my kids. I need people, like parenting, we're judged on what ball team, or whether the ball team wins, or we're judged by the Bible verses that I read as I put my feet up on the recliner. And by the way, if you post pictures of your feet, don't do that anymore. That's just nasty. But we live in a culture that is judged. And we live in a culture that we create this persona for people to think that we are somebody that we actually oftentimes are not. Today's message, walking in confidence, is being who you are. Your family, who they are. Look at your neighbor and repeat these words. You don't have to post it to prove it. You don't have to post it to prove it. I heard this statement once, and it changed my perspective on raising kids. A guy told me, he said, I'm not trying to raise my kids to be a good kid. I'm trying to raise my kids to be a great adult. And it changed my perspective in a culture of helicopter parenting, and in a culture of what's now called bulldozer parenting, where we want to try to pave the way for our kid, where we don't want them to fail or have any kind of trouble in life. Far too often, it takes us away from the lessons that we need to learn as parents and they need to learn as kids. Far too often, it even takes them away from the purpose that God has for them. And I honestly believe if we looked in the mirror and we got deep down into our own soul, the truth of it is that it's a lack of contentment on who we are and where we are in life. We post and we create this persona because we're not content with our day in, day out life. We're comparing other people's highlight reels to our mundane life. It's actually, at the core of it, there's a psychological term for it. It's called the fraudulence complex. It's also known as imposter syndrome. It's the inability to internalize our strengths and our accomplishment. It's basically this. It's the deep down belief that we're actually living as a fraud. Like if they knew what I was thinking, if they knew what really happened, if they didn't believe this persona, if they saw our day in, day out life. You see, nobody ever posts a snap of your marriage arguments. Nobody ever posts a snap of you sitting in the principal's office, and it ain't because your kid made the honor roll. Nobody ever posts those pictures. But we live in this world where we want to be perceived as one thing. And oh my goodness, if they ever found out what thoughts truly went through my head, if they ever found out the things that go on behind the scenes, and church is one of the worst places for it. We walk in and we put on our fake smiles and we come careening in the driveway, and little Johnny only got one shoe on, and you've been arguing because somebody's late getting out of the house. You walk out, you're arguing, it's like, bless God and highly favored. Nah. It's like my marriage is barely hanging on. I often feel like I need to thank my parents more, because as I've gotten older and I've become a parent to 5 amazing kids, one of the things that I realized is how much my parents actually sacrificed for me. I know that as I look back, they never even let me realize kind of what was going on. I was oblivious to it. But I know there were times that they stretched their resources just so I could kind of fit in. I mean, we were never rich. We were never dirt poor. We were definitely middle class, but they provided everything that I needed. My dad slung tires at Goodyear for 30 years. My mom did tax returns and listened to people get angry because the government was taking taxes. And I know that there were times that even behind the scenes they did more to provide me for that pair of shoes that I had to have, or them pump Reeboks of the 80s. Anybody remember them? Man, you had to have those, right? But I think as a parent, far too often, we've stretched to the point where we haven't allowed our kids to fail. We've stretched to the point where we haven't allowed them to meet adversity. I believe that my generation is truly probably the first generation that is entitled. And by entitled, I mean the reality, we've never starved. We've never had to go through a world war. There's global war on terror, but our troops have fought evil across the ocean so that we don't have to fight it here yet. Our country is entitled. We walk into churches and we've got ACs and the water works and we can raise our hand and we don't have to worry about somebody walking in and dragging our children out, or walking in and persecuting us for worshiping our God. Our soldiers have stood in the gap over and over and over. And I think as we get on our computers and as we fire off to the world, and as I see so much hate and anger, I think it's basically out of an entitlement mentality. We don't think about saying or doing the things that we want to do because we live in a nation that is free. But when I look all throughout Scripture, one of the things that I realize is that God didn't prevent the storms from happening. I want my kids not to go through the things that I had to go through. My parents didn't want me to go through the things. They always wanted better for me. And while that's good on one side of the coin, the other side of the coin is this. God never said there wouldn't be storms. God never said there wouldn't be persecution. He said, I'll never leave or forsake you. When we look in the Bible, I look at Jesus and I'm like, man, Peter, he sent his disciples actually into a storm. Jesus sat at a table, and we're going to do communion at the end. He sat at the table and he ate with the guy that he knew was about to betray him and send him to a brutal death. And I'm just like, wow, how entitled are we? God throughout the Bible, I think oftentimes as Christians, we're like, hey, God, what is going on? I need some help. I need you. Why are you allowing this to happen? And the truth of it is, God allows us storms. And God allows us to face giants so that it can catapult us into the greatness that He's actually called us to be in. This morning I want to look at a story of a warrior. On Memorial Day, I wanted to find a true warrior. I'm going to be in 1 Samuel 17. If you don't have your Bibles, that's cool. We're going to throw it up on the screen. I'm going to bounce all through the story, so if you want to keep up, just check it out. I'm going to start in verse 4. Then Goliath, a Philistine champion from Gath, came out of the Philistine ranks to face the forces of Israel. He was over 9 feet tall. He wore a bronze helmet, and his bronze coat of mail weighed 125 pounds. He also wore bronze leg armor. He carried a bronze javelin on his shoulder. The shaft of his spear was as heavy and thick as a weaver's beam, and he tipped with an iron spearhead that weighed 15 pounds. His armor bearer walked ahead of him carrying a shield. Goliath stood, and he shouted a taunt across to the Israelites. Why are you all coming out to fight, he called. I am the Philistine champions, but you are only the servants of Saul. So this was a giant. This was a guy whose mere voice caused fear. This was a guy who walked out in all splendor and glory. He was the giants of giants. He was undefeated. He was the man. He was undefeatable. According to the Israelites, just him walking onto the battlefield would send them into fear. On the back of your worship guide, I've got a question on there, and I want you to answer. You don't have to show anybody, but I want you to answer this question. What is your giant? We all face giants. We all face things in life that keep us incapacitated, that will keep us in fear. For some of you, your giant may be fear. For some of you, your giant may be relevance. Am I even relevant? Am I doing anything that matters? For some of you, it may be loneliness. It may be, am I just meant to go through life alone? For some of you, your giant may be status. You may be trying to climb a corporate ladder that the world says you need, but ultimately you're finding frustration in that. For some of you, your giant may be the perception. You live in anxiety and depression, and it's all wrapped around, what do they think about me? For some of you, your giant may be lack of contentment, lack of a dream. You used to have a dream, and if you were honest, you would say, this is never where I thought I would be. And you're scared to death because you think your dream is too big, or you think your dream is now unattainable. For some of you, it might be acceptance. Will I ever fit in? And this morning I want to send you with this message. There is more to the story. When this giant comes out on the battlefield, this giant is in the head of the Israelites. This giant is undefeatable. But there's more to the story, and God continues to write it. So David left the sheep with another shepherd, and he set out early the next morning with the gifts as Jesse had directed him. David was a shepherd. Jesse was his dad. He'd sent him to the front lines to carry supplies. He was the first Uber driver in the Bible. He arrived at the camp just as the Israelite army was leaving for the battlefield with shouts and battle cries. Soon the Israelites and the Philistine forces, they stood facing each other, army against army. David left his things with the keeper of supplies, and he hurried out to the ranks to greet his brothers who were in the military. As he was talking with them, Goliath the Philistine, champion from Gath, he came out. And then David heard him shout his usual taunt to the army of Israel. Jump down to 26. David asked a soldier standing nearby, what will a man get for killing this Philistine and ending his defiance of Israel? Who is this pagan Philistine anyway that he is allowed to defy the armies of the living God? I wonder how many of us, if we look at our giant that we filled in the blank, who is he to be in your brain? Who is he to be keeping you from the purpose that God himself created? But when David's older brother Eliab heard David talking to the men, he was angry. What are you doing around here anyway? What about those few sheep you're supposed to be taking care of? I know of your pride and deceit. You just want to see the battle. And then David says this. He goes in to see the king. He says, don't worry about this Philistine. I'll go fight him. And then the king, don't be ridiculous. There's no way you can fight this Philistine and possibly win. You're only a boy, and he's been a man of war since his youth. Excuse after excuse after excuse. How many of us look at that blank that we filled in with our giant, and there's an excuse. There's a voice in our head that says, are you crazy? You can't do that. I know where you've been. I know what you've done. You're not qualified for that. But David persisted. I've been taking care of my father's sheep and goats, he said. When a lion or a bear comes to steal a lamb from the flock, I go after it with the club and I rescue the lamb from its mouth. If the animal turns on me, I catch it by the jaw and I club it to death. I have done this with both lions and bears, and I'll do it again with this pagan Philistine. For he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the claws of the lion and bear will rescue me from this Philistine. There's so many ways to go with this story. If you grew up in church, I'm sure you've heard this preached 100 different ways. David was this kid who when they were getting ready to anoint a new king, his dad was called and was told to bring all of his sons, and his dad didn't even bring him. His dad thought so little of him, like you don't even have a chance, left him out with the sheep as he brought his other sons. This was a kid whose brothers, as we see, don't have any respect whatsoever. He was belittling him. Not only was he belittling, he's like, not only are you a shepherd, but you don't even have a big flock. You have little few sheep. What are you even doing here? This is a kid who walks into the king, and the king didn't even take serious. But here's something about David we need to know. True purpose can only come from God. True purpose doesn't come from man. True purpose can only come from God. David didn't need to know Goliath's strengths. He didn't need to know how big and bad Goliath was, because he already knew God's strength. He didn't have to care about Goliath. He didn't care that he had a 15-pound spear. He didn't care that he had all the bronze. Why? Because he had seen the power of the Most High God. He had seen the power as he fought the attacks from the lion and the bear. You see, Goliath was undefeated, but so was David. Goliath was a big warrior, but ultimately, so was David. He was the greatest warrior of the Philistine army. Just the thought of him, his voice booming, should have made David scared to death. And I want to encourage you, whatever you filled in that blank this morning, don't lose heart because of your giant. God has given you everything you need to defeat your giant. And often you have to face your giant to step out in the greatness that God has for you. Often you have to face your giant to step out in God's calling. Because to defeat the giant, you have to rely on Him. David, alone in the field. I got to thinking about David. I got to thinking about everything that he was doing before he met the Philistine out on the battlefield. Day after day after day, staring at nothing but sheep. Day after day after day. Clock in, clock out, go to sleep. Wake up, the same stupid sheep. Over and over in nothingness. There were days that he had to have this thought, is this all I'm here for? There's days that he had to have this thought, is my job even worth, like, what is the purpose? I have no purpose. Hello, God. Something. And then, as if that wasn't bad enough, boom, here comes a lion. I don't know if you know much about a lion, about the most vicious animal in the world. As if I don't have a meaningless job, if I don't have a mundane life, if I'm not lonely and staring into nothingness, now I got to protect the sheep that aren't even mine, that I don't even really care a whole lot about. Even more than that, here comes a bear. Can you imagine watching sheep, bored out of your mind, and on the back 2 feet, a bear coming at you roaring? Hello, God. As if it wasn't bad enough, now I'm being attacked. And he kills him, right? That's awesome. David had to be a bad dude. He clubbed a bear and a lion. He killed him, grabbed him by the jaw. That's a bad dude. But on top of it, after he kills him, he turns around. He's like, hey, look, ain't even nobody there. He didn't have Facebook to hold the head up and smile. He didn't have Snapchat to be like, hey, look at me. He didn't have any of that. He's in a desert. Nobody was watching. Nobody cared. Even in his greatness. And I think killing a lion and bear was great. Even in his greatness. You know when he saw that lion coming, he had to be scared to death. And one of the reasons I wanted to talk about David, because when you think of lions and bears, you think about those attacks. On Memorial Day, I know soldiers, and the thing that David found and that our American soldiers have found is that warriors learn how to turn fear into faith. Warriors learn how to turn fear into faith. David, at one point out in the middle of nowhere, had to be terrified. But here's what happened. He didn't flinch. He didn't run. He didn't hide. He didn't buckle. He said, I've stared down giants in the past. Even when he walked onto that battlefield and he saw the most intimidating that had thousands in terror, he said, I've seen the bears. I've seen the lions. I've faced the attacks. This giant means nothing to me. God was faithful then, and I know that he'll be faithful now, even with this giant. I got to think David was thinking, you know what? I've been in the desert. I've been in the storm. I've been in the darkness. I've been in the loneliness. I've been in the valley of in the shadow of death. But God remained faithful. In the jaws of the beast, in the most vicious attack, God was with me. He never said a lion wouldn't come. He never said a bear wouldn't come. He never said I wouldn't be lonely. He said, I will never leave or forsake you. In the loneliness of the night, he was there. In the fear, he was there. You see, faith is remembering what he has done and knowing that he will do it again. Faith is ultimately looking back and saying, you know what? I've seen what he's done for me before, and I know that he's going to do it again. And if you're sitting in here this morning, you can have that kind of faith. I know what he's done before, and I know what he'll do again. When I get a call from a doctor, or I'm laying on a table, wondering if I'm going to get to have a Christmas with my kids again. When you're overseas and you wonder, am I ever going to get to kiss my spouse again? Faith is remembering what he has done and trusting that he'll do it again. At night, when the demons come and you can't sleep, you wonder, can he forgive it? Faith is believing that he has brought you out and he will bring you out again. And to answer that question, he already has forgiven it. Faith is when you wonder, is this all there is? Do I have any purpose in being here? When it seems your dream died a long time ago. I think there's many of us that if we said, you know, I had this dream, and if I thought I would be where I am now, I never would have dreamed that I would be here. But faith is knowing that He's brought you to this point, and He's got so much more in store. Even in the valley of the shadow of death, when grief and darkness are bearing down so much that it feels like it's going to crush your heart. And that there's not going to be any more sunshine. Faith is remembering what He has done and knowing that He'll be faithful again. When I don't think my marriage is going to work out. When I don't think my kids are going to be a success because I failed as a parent. When I fell over and over and over trying to kick this giant that's just got a control over my heart. Faith is remembering what He has done and trusting He will do it again. As our worship team comes up, I want to finish with this. There's more to your story. If you haven't heard anything over this entire series, what you need to know is there is more to your story. You're not just whatever your career is. You're not just a stay-at-home mom. You're not just a whatever somebody spoke over you and labeled you as. You're not just a screw-up. You're not just a loser. You're not just a mistake. You're not just an addict. You're not just a disappointment. You're the child of the Most High God. You are beautifully and wonderfully made. And He does not make mistakes. He doesn't make mistakes. You may be in the biggest dogfight of your life with your giant. You may have people coming against you in ways you've never had. You may have an attack on your marriage. You may have an attack on your children. You may have an attack on your health. But can I tell you something this morning? He's been there for you. And He'll continue to stand by your side. I know that I can because I am a child of the Most High God. You are a warrior. He created you for a time such as this. And even if you don't understand it, even if you can't comprehend it, He's put you exactly where He needs you. Even if you don't like it, He's preparing you for a greatness that you can't even begin to imagine. You are a warrior of the Most High God. You are a son and a daughter of the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. And He gave you everything you need to fight. He gave you everything that you need to defeat that blank of your giant. He's given you a talent. He's given you purpose. He's given you people to surround you. In the darkest of nights, when you don't feel like you can continue, there's people all throughout this room, all throughout this church, that when you don't think you can do it anymore, when you don't think you can take their next steps, He's surrounded you by people that will hold you up, that will be your sword and your shield. He's given you people. He's surrounded you with warriors as a child of the Most High God. He loves you beyond imagination. He loves you so much that He sent His Son to die for you. As our guys come forward and we enter into this stage of it, we started the sermon honoring our warriors who sacrificed it all for our freedom. We're going to end it with honoring our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. who gave it all for our eternity.